In the last year and a half, I talked to maybe 1,000 product leaders, and there's a long tail of people that want to do a lot of random things, but probably the 80% of the people that I talk to, they fall into three different buckets. They either want to be an executive, CPO, CEO, GM, etc. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is like, hey, I want to be a founder. I've been in an early stage company, but I think I want to be kind of in that founder seat. And then the third one is like, hey, like I want to just have a really good life. Like I want to be maybe have a fractional consulting business. Maybe I just want to coach people. But I think very few people have that clarity of like exactly where they want to be in 5 to 10 years. So I think something that I'm very excited about is evolving the community to one, help people figure out, here are the options that you have. And here's how to think about the different options and different ways to help you decide what might be the best option for you. And then once you've decided what option you want to go for, then let's help you get there as fast as possible with the least amount of friction possible. So I get really excited about this long-term vision.
Cool. So welcome everyone. Today we're going to do something a little bit different than the last few episodes. And this is a chance for me to interview Marc a little bit. It's going to be a discussion. We're going to go back and forth, but I've been part of a community that Marc created for the last 6 months or so. It's called Supra. Marc can tell you a little bit about it in a second when I put him on the spot, but I've had a very positive experience so far in this community. It's filling a gap in my life since I've joined. And we just thought it would be interesting to take an episode to just talk about what Supra is and why Marc created it, and go into the things that this community is doing for people. And it'll be fun because I've had a bunch of questions for you, Marc, that we probably haven't even had the chance to cover one-on-one. So we figured, why don't we just turn on the mic and record it?
Yeah, I'm super excited. Let's do it.
Cool. Okay, so why don't you start by sharing what's the origin story of Supra? Why does this community exist in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll share a little bit more about my career. So I got into product about 8 years. And my first rollout of product was actually at this company called Asana in San Francisco. And somehow I convinced them to hire me as their first new grad PM. And I was there for 5 years. Joined right around when they raised their Series C. And
that was was that the 50 million round that Sam Altman led back in the day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I remember seeing headlines about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had Sam Altman, Madame D'Angelo, a lot of heavy hitters. And of course, the fact that Dustin is the co-founder of Facebook did not hurt. But yeah, I joined when the company was still under 200 employees. We had 3 to 4 PMs. And yeah, I had an incredible experience. I was there for 5 years, got to see the company scale a lot. By the time I left, we were a public company, over 2,000 employees. I think at that time, I was like, I think I'm ready to go back to a smaller company again. So I decided to join a Series A startup in the clinical trial space where I was brought in to lead the product team. And it was a big challenge in many ways. I think you join a new stage of company, right? Like I had never been in a Series A, new industry, but probably the hardest challenge was I was reporting directly to a CEO founder who was spread super thin. And for the first time in my career, I was feeling pretty isolated. I didn't have that many thought partners to discuss. I mean, I had a great CEO, I had a great head of people, but I didn't really have any product minds to talk to. And one of the most helpful things that I did at that time, I started to reach out to other Series A heads of product, and really started using those calls to be like, hey, like, I'm seeing these problems. Are you also seeing them? How are you solving them? Here's what I tried. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. And that ended up becoming probably the most productive calls that I had on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis. So first I was like, there's something here. And every person that I talk to who are heads of product at early stage companies are really struggling with. So I think, I'm not sure, is that something that you also struggle with, Ben? Because you were head of product at a Series A company as well.
I have found that throughout my entire career, especially in the last decade in product, just the ability to talk to someone else who is either currently in the same type of setup that I'm in, or recently, or maybe even not that recently, but has experience at that stage and that kind of setup, and to be able to have a sounding board to maybe check my thinking on hey, like, are some of these challenges ones that you've been through before, and how have you navigated them? And if they could help you see around some corners, that's a super interesting conversation. It's also just like a great way to build a relationship with someone by talking about shared experiences. And I think people really love to feel like they can contribute to helping someone else work through stuff, especially if they can be uh, talking about parts of their story that might not come up that often in everyday life. The average person doesn't get asked on a daily basis about things they spent 4 years trying to figure out 10 years ago, you know? Um, but
Totally.
it's nice when someone actually asks you about those experiences and you get a chance to help them. So yeah, I've tried at every stage of my career to find those people. And I think what I will say is it can be challenging sometimes to find that right person because everyone's got a limited network and sometimes you don't even know what the right questions are to ask. So I think sometimes it takes some stumbling around in the dark with people before you find those right people that you can end up building those relationships with.
Totally. And I feel like even in the conversations that I feel that I haven't been able to solve my problems, just by having someone that tells me, hey, like, I don't know how to solve this, but I've been there or I've experienced something similar, makes you feel a lot better. Be like, okay, maybe the company is not a shit show or it's not a total chaos, right? I think that makes you feel understood at least, or that it's not you, it's just the nature of the role. But anyways, so long story short, so that was the first hint that, hey, there might be something here. At some point, I decided that I didn't really want to continue working at this Series A company. I was working long hours for, I had a good amount of equity if you compare it to the benchmark, but still was like, I'm working really hard, and the math or the expected value for me is not what I wanted to be. I wanted to have more control over my own life. So I was like, okay, like I'm also feeling extremely burned out. I had worked really hard at Asana, only took like 2 weeks off, did like 11 months here, dealt with my dad passing away too, which was emotionally very taxing. So like I think I need a break. So I took 4 months off, which was amazing. And I kept coming back to this idea of like, and what, interestingly enough, what brought me back to this idea of building a product community was I had a lot of friends who at the time were also transitioning roles. Some of them were going from senior ICs to people managers, or some of them were going from people managers to manager of managers. And that challenge that I was feeling when I was in the Series A was also consistent with what they were feeling. Like they felt, hey, like there's not a class that I can take, there's no content that I can take to help me get there. But I know there's other people that are dealing with it, and I just don't know what's the best way to connect with those people. So that was like the second insight there. That was like, hey, there's something here, especially for people who are going through those IC to people management transitions. So yeah, I started interviewing people, especially a lot of my friends were going through that. And sure, the idea was like, why don't we just get a group of you in maybe a group of 8 or 9? We'll meet once a month. We'll just use that time to go deep onto 3 challenges that 3 of you have. And the first half, the group will push you on your thinking, your challenge, ask questions, help you crystallize the situation. And then the second half, people can share, here's what I've done when I've been in a situation. And yeah, tried one group, got really positive feedback. And that's when I decided, okay, let's go for it. And that's
Were you
how Supra
charging
was.
people? Were you charging people from the very beginning to participate?
No. So the first group was actually for free. I told them, hey, like I'm not confident that this is going to work. So I'm not going to charge you. And actually, I was very lucky too. So one of the coaches that I worked with at Asana, the exec coaches that I worked at, they had a very generous education stipend. So I worked with a coach, and I stayed with touch with her through the time. She connected me with one of her coworkers that was also starting his own coaching practice, which is, his name is Charlie, and he was our first Supra facilitator. And he was like, hey, I really like what you're doing. I'll do this pro bono for you. And so that's how I was able to make it work without having to put a lot of capital up front. But after that group, I started charging.
Got it. So it sounds like you did just literally one monthly session for 1 month, or for how many months was it before you had the light bulb go off that maybe I can spin up another group and start charging people to participate in this?
Yeah, it was after the second month. It was very clear. Because the first, before starting Supra, I went very deep into studying different communities and what worked well, what didn't. And I think a clear pattern that I saw from either members that I interviewed or even the research that I did in the companies, a trend that I found is that it's really important to spend a lot of time in the beginning building that trust, right? Getting to know people, getting to know where they come from, what are their challenges, getting to know a little bit of like their background, their story. So the first session, you don't really go deep on the challenges. It's a lot more about getting to know everyone. So then once that trust is there, then you can go deeper and people can actually bring the meaty, juicy topics. So that second session, that second month, that's when I saw the power of like, hey, like people are bringing real challenges and they're walking away from that session a lot better than they walked in the first place.
That was certainly my experience. I mean, it sounds like even though it's been, it's been almost 2 years now since
Yeah, about
Supra.
a year and 8 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if I've been in the community for 6 months or so, my first session was with a group of about 8 people. We did the introductions. I think it wasn't probably until maybe the second or third session that I started to feel like I'm starting to get like the value. And I think the value for me started to click when I saw the data points. If you imagine 8 people, and I think the way you structure the groups is very thoughtful because like they were all like early stage product people, and being able to see how the macro environment is influencing and impacting 8 different people over the course of months allowed me to start to get invested in their storylines. And I wanted to be helpful and they wanted to be helpful to me. And it felt like there was more than what I would say the default assumption that I think I have and a lot of people have when they hear of a product community is like a Slack group. And while there is a Slack group that people get invited into when they join Supra, I think the Slack group is just like the thing in the background. Just like if you think about your job at a company having a Slack group, it's not like the Slack group that your company uses is the company. Like there's a lot more happening in the company other than the Slack group. That's how it feels to me with Supra. And obviously it's participate as much as you want. So like if you don't want to participate more, you don't have to. But if you do want, there is this Slack community there. But the monthly sessions for me have been really like the probably 80% of the value that I've been getting out of the community. It sounds like what we do now in these sessions hasn't deviated that much from what you did in those early sessions.
Yeah, we tweaked it right in there, but the core concept of going deep on people's challenges still very much the same. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up the importance of curating the groups. I think that was actually probably one of the biggest challenges early on, because I think now we have the necessary skill, right, to actually get very specific on the way we do curation. And maybe to give some more context there, the way I like to curate groups are basically, maybe taking a step back. The goal of when I'm putting groups together, right, of like around 8 people, I'm trying to find people that are having very similar challenges. And the best heuristics that I found to build a group that has similar challenges is basically following 3 criteria. One is the company size or stage, right? Like someone that works at Meta is going to have very different challenges than someone that works at a seed or Series A company. The second one is the seniority of the person, right? And not only the seniority, but also the scope and how many degrees removed are they from the CEO, right? Someone who's a group PM is having very different challenges. Someone who's a VP of product who is part of the exec team. And then the third one that I think is interesting, and that one's actually the hardest one, but I try to do matching when possible, is like matching people based on aspirations, right? Like, do you want to be a founder? Do you want to be an exec, CPO, CEO? Or maybe you just want to have a really nice life. You love what you're doing, but you don't have that many aspirations of climbing. You just want to be really good at your job, but that's it. And I found when I'm able to hit those 3 things, like that's really where the magic kicks in.
Yeah, I would say one thing that's clear to me in the community is I think we're at, what was it, like 200
Yeah.
and something now?
I checked this Slack today. I think we're 238. Yeah.
Cool. What's interesting is that if you imagine each of these people in the community no one is in multiple groups, right? So everyone's only in one group at a time.
Yeah, that's right.
So if everyone's in a group that's matched based on this, then you're looking at what, like 20 something groups of people, like
Yeah,
roughly?
more or less. Yeah.
And the idea that you can actually create a grouping mechanism that allows such a wide spectrum of seniority and experience levels and scope to still each find their own kind of group of peers within the community while still enabling this cross seniority interaction where someone who's maybe a very senior IC, they're always like one click away from someone who's like a VP of product at like the next stage of company, and they can maybe like ask them, hey, like what would you expect from a senior IC at your company? There's a lot of that cross community pollination that can happen outside of the facilitated sessions, even if they're not in the group together, which I've personally been finding really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the motivation behind a lot of the things that we do outside of the core groups of those 90-minute sessions. And like the Slack community, right? a lot of people are thinking, hey, do I want to go from a small company to a big company? Or a big topic these days is like, hey, do I want to go from a people manager back to an IC? And I think just having examples in the community that you can be like, hey, like it sounds like this person has done it. Can I grab 30 minutes with them and ask them about it? Or even just for people looking for their next opportunity. It's been really cool to see our members trust our brand and our vetting to then feel very comfortable, be like, hey, like maybe we only had one discussion, but I trust you that you're good at what you do, and I feel comfortable referring you to your role. And that's has been probably the most energizing of this entire journey of seeing, yeah, the community just show up for each other, even when the connection or the bond is just not super deep at that point in time, but I'm sure I'll get there. Yeah, I think something that's been really fun to over time has been organizing either our roundtable discussions where we go very deep on one topic. So a couple of weeks ago, we had one around, we have a few people that are leading either horizontal AI or ML teams and just sharing, you know, hey, here's how we're interfacing with other teams. Here's what's working. Here's what's not. Here are the models that we're using. Here's how much we're paying for it. And I just sharing that information, I think was really helpful to see, hey, like we were about to try this, but actually, I don't know if I'm going to try it anymore because this other person just shared that it was a total failure for X, Y, Z reasons. And knowing my company, I know that's not going to work. So I think there's a lot of value just from cross-pollinating beyond title, company size, etc.
Yeah, just in my last session, I'm not going to say anything confidential, but we did have a group discussion where one of the people in the group brought the topic of their marketing team was impacted by a layoff and they still need to have some kind of product marketing function. And so the discussion we had for about 20 minutes was about how people have seen kind of the interplay between product managers and product marketers play out. And has anyone ever tried to maybe distill or instill the role of product marketing into the product managers so as to not need a dedicated product marketing function? And that was just like such an interesting discussion because multiple people brought different perspectives. And I learned a ton by just sharing some of my experience, but also hearing how it differs from other people's experience. And I think that the roundtables are one way, the sessions are another way. I think we also have the happy hours that you do. By the way, for listeners, we're not trying to like turn this into a self-promotional thing about Supra. And I do have a couple questions where I want to ask Marc about things that are not going that well in the community and things that could be better. But I do want to also just like start by highlighting the fact that to properly run a community the way Marc is doing it, which as a member of the community, I find impressive, is that it's not just a Slack group. It's not just monthly sessions. It's not just happy hours. It's like the way that these different pieces come together that I think is making the community something that I'm excited to be part of. So, and my guess is that's a very intentional decision from you, and that you are treating the community like a product. You're product managing the community.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll get to the challenges, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now, right? Like that it's a product that has a lot of pieces and that is not very tech heavy. So it requires someone to be constantly orchestrating and shaping the experience of over 200 members, being very intentional about everything. And I think that's tough to scale.
So let's just jump in. Like, Marc, what are maybe like one or two aspects of Supra that you still feel like you're not happy with the state that they're in? You want them to be better?
There's a few. I think that the biggest one for me right now is that I want to do more in person for multiple reasons. I think trust building via Zoom is very hard, right? I think we found a way to make it work. But part of me is if we're able to do so much in Zoom, I can only imagine how much more trust and how much deeper we can go if we were meeting in person. So I think eventually I would like to have some of the groups actually meet in person, maybe once a quarter, maybe every other month, because I do think that the conversation is going to be a lot more productive and people are going to be a lot more engaged. Especially if you already work remote, people have some Zoom fatigue. And I worry that eventually will end up people making feel like, hey, like I need a break. I cannot do these Zoom sessions every time. So that's something that's very top of mind for me. And not only just having those sessions in person, I also want to find a way to get everyone together, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Because I do think that's really the power of the community, being able to expand your network very quickly and be able to find your people, right? If you are a platform product leader, right? Talking to other platform product leaders, or if you're early stage, just connecting everyone. I think really, I'm a true believer that when you get an amazing group of people together in person, just incredible conversations happen that will have many ripples effects on their careers, on their relationships. So that's one, I think, more in-person stuff. And I think I'm working towards it, but again, and that maybe shifts to my second one, which is I'm bootstrapping this, right? And I've been very careful about making sure there's a good business from day one. And that means that in an ideal world, I would have a lot more help, right? Right now, I have someone who's working full-time operations for me offshore. I have 17 coaches that I contract. But in terms of like the decisions that get made, I'm the main decision maker for a lot of things. And I think that sometimes feel like slows down how quickly the community can grow. So I think that's something that I'm thinking of, like, how do I scale myself? And to be fair, I don't know if I would do things very differently if I was going to start over. I have a very strong conviction that building a community business with venture backed dollars is a huge mistake. Because my philosophy when it comes to building community, it's not about the quantity of people that you get in the community, it's about the quality. And I'm very aware that we're going to reach a point where we're just not going to be able to bring more people in because we've reached a saturation point where all the really good product people are either already in a community or they're no longer interested. So I'm glad I made that decision, but I think now I'm living with the consequences of scaling slowly and spending responsibly, but at the same time doing the best I can to deliver a good experience. So yeah, those are probably the big two that come to mind.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think if you had taken on some venture capital dollars, I think you'd be facing a bunch of unnatural pressures to probably compromise something important, whether that's the quality of the people being brought in, whether that's the quality of the facilitated sessions, whether that's the flexibility to add and sometimes remove coaches if they're not meeting your expectations. There's probably just like a whole bunch of factors that would change the way you're building this. But as a member of the community, I am happy that you have not taken VC dollars because I know you're running the whole show and nothing's going to happen unless you think it's the right thing for everyone involved. So this is an example where, if there was more value that I could get out of Supra by you ramping up the amount of funding that you had to play with, I would probably just tell you. But I don't think I've noticed anything that I would personally get a lot more out of that would also be good for the community so far.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The last piece also that I think is really challenging is related to the quality. Something that I still find very hard is saying no to people. We definitely talk to a lot of people. We get a good amount of applications, and every time I'm like, ooh, like that could be like X amount of revenue per year. When we say no to people, are like either people that are not ready for Supra, even they're not senior enough. Maybe I don't think they're a good cultural fit. Something that I really care about is just having people that are, of course, really good at what they do, but also that they have an attitude that they just want to get better and they want to have a balanced approach to community. They're not just joining to get everything. They also are willing to give and they're excited to give. And I think when that's not true, it makes me really uncomfortable because I've seen cultures or teams go sour quickly by just having one bad actor join. So I think that's something that I do. I'll steal all the calls myself. Like I interview everyone, which it's good and bad. I enjoy it because I get to see everyone. I get to meet everyone. Then that helps me do the matching a lot better because I get a feel for people's personalities. But at the same time, just reminding me like, hey, like maybe this is not the right person and that's okay. I think that's something that I still, to this day, I struggle with.
So this is maybe a good transition to talking about, we've talked a lot about the members of the community and the way we set up the community or the way that you've designed the whole thing to work. The coaches play a big role in the community. Could you maybe speak a little bit to the way that you think about adding, let's call them, maybe it's like a three-sided marketplace. You've got the platform, you've got the coaches, and then you've got the members. Let's talk for a second about the coaches. How did you formulate what the criteria are for the kind of coaches you want? And then what's the level of kind of like direction that you give the coaches when they join the platform?
Yeah, great question. And to be totally frank, I don't think I've figured out the exact formula of what their perfect profile is, but it definitely has been refined over time. And yeah, at a very high level, what I'm looking for is one, coaches that have experience coaching, not only just individuals, but also they've done some sort of like facilitation or group coaching. Because I think managing a group of product leaders takes a lot of energy, right? Like everyone wants to get airtime, everyone wants to talk. So I think just being very comfortable and setting the pace and setting the structure and even pushing people, I think that requires some level of practice and confidence that not everyone has. I think that's one. And then the second one that's important to me too is I want the coach to be able to go deep with the group and be able to ask that question, that like again question that maybe no one is asking, that's going to allow the group to go deeper or get to the root of the issue. And in order to do that, I would say half of the topics that we discuss are kind of hard product topics, right? Like strategy, craft, etc. The other half are people management challenges or people challenges. So someone who either has been a product leader themselves is really important or has coached many product leaders. I think that's like the two criteria. I probably have slight preference for people that have been a product leader. And the second one is someone who has led teams, right? Because it's very important to just be able to understand the nuances, how to deal with reports, how to deal with peers. So that's the criteria that I look for. And in terms of the onboarding, we're very opinionated about what the first session should look like. And again, that's because that's what we've gotten really good at, of like, how do you expedite, how do you build a lot of trust in an hour and a half in the first month? It's a problem that we've been thinking very deeply. So we have a very clear formula that we use, and we want people to use that formula. And then for the following sessions, we try to follow a pretty consistent agenda. There's some building blocks where we allow each coach to experiment with those building blocks and adapt those building blocks based on kind of the group that they're working with. Every group is different. Some people want to be very prepared and they want to know the challenges beforehand. So they'll work with the group to be like, hey, like, how can we curate the topics beforehand? Some people are really busy and they're, hey, actually, I just want to go into the meeting and dive into the challenges. So I think maybe that adds to that third criteria that comes to mind, which is being able to read what the group needs and adapt on the fly based on what that group needs.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. I think our coach has been great. Won't name names, but he's been helpful in facilitating and like lubricating the discussion. It's not an easy job, like you said. I think time management and making sure we cover everything and getting through the agenda, sharing the airspace, it's a very involved job that requires a lot of presence and mindfulness. And then in our last session, we had one of the new coaches come and shadow. So it was cool to kind of allow another person in. But that coach that was shadowing by the end of the call also got looped into the discussion. It was fun. Yeah. So
yeah, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. And you can be completely honest. Do you think the model could work without the coaches? Like that. I mean, that's always like a thought that's in the back of my mind. Be like, because right now that coach is the most expensive frontside line that we have in the business.
So I think you could, okay, so if you told me like, hey, how would this whole system work if the coaches all just disappeared and got hit by a bus and we had to keep running the sessions? I would say you could probably start a round robin where one person in the group is the facilitator of that upcoming session. So they know ahead of time, you've got a few weeks to prepare, you're going to be facilitating, and then they get there and they're facilitating and participating to some degree, but mostly facilitating. And then someone else does it the following time and someone else does it the following time. So you can almost like maybe pass the ball around and have different people run it. The problem with that though is that not everyone is equally skilled or interested in doing that work. And you could argue that everyone's paying a membership fee and they want to be able to participate. And if you're having them do the work on your behalf, then maybe it feels like you're delegating the work to the people. You're asking the customers to also provide the service. So I think that can be a tension. But I would say that the counter to that is it's possible that by having people take a stab at facilitating a session, they build a lot of empathy for the group that they maybe don't build as much by just participating. And so it's interesting. I think maybe if you're ever interested in exploring what almost like a self-running group is, I'd be happy to be part of the beta for that and just see how it works.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. I'm a member of another community for founders, and they also have these core groups, but they're self-facilitated. And people know that I run Supra, so they, of course, be like, you'd be the perfect fit for facilitation, which means that I've been facilitating this group for the last 7-8 months. And yeah, one is really hard, but I think that probably between you and me, I hate it. And the reason why I don't like it is because it doesn't really allow me to participate fully into the group. A lot of times I'm a lot more worried about making sure that the group, like the session is running smoothly rather than focusing on the learning or focusing on going deep on my challenge. Because I think when you think about what the value of these groups is, of course, you probably get the most value when you get to go deep and explore your own challenge. But I think one of the things that's actually really useful is also hearing what other people are struggling with. Because one, I think you might have already seen that challenge before, and then you can crystallize your learnings from just sharing your experience and remember what were the takeaways. So the second one is, if you haven't seen that problem before, it's really good for you to listen and figure out how they solved it or what happened. So because you will likely encounter that problem, and it's going to be very handy to have it. And I just feel like when I'm facilitating, I'm not able to retain as much information. So I think that's the other one. And then I think then the second one too is that because there's that facilitator there, you feel a little bit more guilty about skipping the session. So I think that also helps a lot with retention and or attendance and commitment as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, because there is an accountability mechanism in place that I know if I'm gonna miss a session, I get dinged as a member of the community if I just don't show up or if I don't follow protocol for letting the coach know. So, and I like that because I'm counting on the other people being there every time. So I want to make sure people know that we got to respect the space, like honor the space. But then the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is, if you think about this type of community, which is product leaders, what we're doing all day in our jobs is leading discussions and keeping things moving forward and always trying to figure out what the action items are and what the takeaways and it's actually nice to join a meeting where I don't have to run the meeting, right?
Totally.
I can just participate and I can be part of that and trust the process and trust that I'm just part of the community. And if you ask people to facilitate, then you're taking away the benefit and kind of turning it into like more work, right? Which is, I don't think what people necessarily want.
No, absolutely. And maybe a fourth challenge too. I think, dealing with people's schedules is super tough, right? We're talking to people that have big teams, have back-to-back meetings. And I think that's something that a lot of our operations bandwidth goes into figure out everyone's schedules. And then, we do have very serious commitment norms, right? Of like, hey, if you miss more than 2 sessions and there's not a good reason for why you miss those sessions, I will remove you from the community. But we also like to be reasonable. And so if you tell us, hey, like maybe 1 week or 2 weeks ahead, like we can actually flex and adapt to your schedule. But again, that means that then we have to go and ask 7 other product leaders, hey, like tell me your schedule for the next couple of weeks. It's a crazy puzzle that you have to figure out. But honestly, I think it's super worth it, because the moment you let the attendance kind of start to fall apart, it's like a parasite or a virus. It starts to move around very quickly, and then the life cycle of that group starts to die down very quickly. So something that I think is worth doing, even though it's a big logistical nightmare in a way.
Yeah, totally. And then it sounds like you also you have some early cohorts that are getting reassigned to new groups. So it sounds like you like to let the groups run for, what is it, like 10 or 11 months maybe, and then like shuffle people around into new groups.
Yeah, more or less. So the way I like to think about it is we have groups that have been running for a year and a half and they're still together, and they just have really gelled, and they all have been following a very similar trajectory. So it just makes sense for them to stay together. But then there's some other groups that the 2 things that have happened. I think one is that a lot of things that happen in a year and a half. People might change companies, might go from a big company to a small company, might go back to an IC, might reprioritize what the things they care in their life. And that means that like in a year and a half, the group can be in a very different place than they were when they started. So I think that's one that kind of got me thinking, be like, hey, maybe there's a life cycle, there's an expiration to groups. And then the second one is, as we've grown, there's also been FOMO of like, I already built a very deep connection with these 7 people, but there's all these new people that are joining that seem really cool. I want to continue to expand my network and learn from a new set of peers. People are like, hey, like I can already channel that inner person in my group. I can think like, hey, when I'm in a challenge, what would this person do? Like I can already do that because I know them well. And I want to be able to do that with a set of 8 or 9 new people, which I think is cool. And to be honest, if I was in their situation, I probably want to do the same. So what we found now, like around the 9 to 12 month mark, that's when we start to engage groups and be like, hey, like, here's an option. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I've already seen this play out in my group too. We're, like I said, 5 or 6 months in, and you can already start to see people, myself included. Like I was head of product at a Series A company, and now I'm doing like consulting and advising and still working with early stage companies as a product leader, just in a fractional capacity. And there's really not exactly anyone in the group that's doing like exactly what I'm doing. So I'm like, I don't know how many of the people like me there are in the community, but maybe I end up finding myself back in a full-time role at the end of the year, and I kind of gravitate back into the same persona. So people come in and out of that. But if I were to go get a job at Facebook, let's say by the end of the year, then me being in this group with all these like heads of product of early stage companies, or now some of them are founders, that doesn't maybe feel like the right fit anymore. So then it would make sense to maybe regroup me into a group of people that are also at big tech companies as PMs.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's been actually one of the very interesting observations that I've had in the last year and a half of, I think there's some people that have a very clear perspective of where they want to go with their careers. But I think for the most part, people are still keeping their options open. And I think that's where I get really excited. I'm like, okay, there might be an opportunity here for us, right? Like, I think in the last year and a half, I maybe talked to maybe 1,000 product leaders. And there's a long tail of people that want to do a lot of random things, but probably 80% of the people that I talk to, they fall into 3 different buckets. They either want to be an executive, CPO, CEO, GM, etc. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is like, hey, I want to be a founder. I've been in an early stage company, but I think I want to be kind of in that founder seat. And then the third one is like, hey, like I want to just have a really good life. Like I want to be maybe have a fractional consulting business. Maybe I just want to coach people. But I think very few people have that clarity of like exactly where they want to be in 5 to 10 years. So I think something that I'm very excited about is evolving the community to one, help people figure out, here are the options that you have. And here's how to think about the different options and different ways to help you decide what might be the best option for you, or even the best option to prototype how it would be to be work on those options. And then once you've decided what option you want to go for, then let's help you get there as fast as possible with the least amount of friction possible. So I get really excited about this kind of long-term vision. To be honest, I'm not sure exactly how it will manifest, but I think there's something there. Yeah, I'd love to get your reactions on that.
Yeah, I think you're sitting in a unique position of understanding the current state, the historical, let's call it historical narrative, maybe that led them to the current state. And then you have a direct connection into getting ongoing data points about where they are and maybe even soliciting input from them on how their goals are changing or what they value. And maybe if I start in one of those buckets that you mentioned where I want to be an executive, but then 6 months go by and I'm like, actually, I'm like getting a little bit of a founder itch right now. And you can collect that information from 200 people now, 300 people next year, or ultimately 500 people or 1,000 people. There's clearly a network effect to your ability to make sense of those signals and then connect them with whether it's with each other within the community based on, it's rare to see 2 PMs start a company together. That doesn't feel to me like the most complementary skill sets, but maybe there could be external kind of opportunities for you to match people with other communities. Like maybe if there's a Supra for engineering leaders, I don't know if that exists, but if that does exist, then there's interesting opportunities to connect people with those kind of opportunities. There's other avenues that you could also maybe connect people in the community with. Hey, like maybe Marc's gone out and built relationships with a bunch of investors.
Yeah.
And maybe part of their investment criteria is they love backing teams that have a product leader as one of the co-founders. And maybe there's specific spaces that they're interested in. And if you, Marc, see someone, I don't know, like a fintech product leader start an exciting new AI meets fintech company, and they've already got their technical co-founder and maybe they're about to start raising, you've got this super early signal that no one else has that you could connect them with an investor. And then before you know it, you've built like a really interesting feeder ecosystem into seed stage investors, pre-seed investors. I think there's a lot of different avenues through which you could like plug in to add more value to people as you go. But I think you're playing it the right one step at a time.
Totally.
And I think you're not getting carried away. I don't think you've taken any swings so far from what I can tell that are like too ambitious or too lofty for what you could meet. I think you're being very intentional with the staging, but there's a lot of growth avenues for you as far as I can see here.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. And I think taking the wrong swing could kill me or kill Supra more specifically. I really do think that the community and the people are the foundation. And my goal right now is to continue to find ways to deliver as much possible to our members. And then I think that is the best way to grow the community, because I think I have a deep conviction that the people that we have are super high quality. And my favorite part of growing is, hey, having our members tell their friends about the community. I think it makes the vetting easy. Someone already knows them, and that's how it grows organically. So totally agree there. But yeah, I think there's definitely something around the founder. Like it makes me sad sometimes. I talk to a lot of product leaders who would be great founders or want to be founders, but a lot of people in the community have are having their first kid or have multiple kids, right? And I think the more used you get to getting paid really well as a product leader, the harder it is to take the plunge and be a founder. And if we could remove that pressure, right? And I think the two biggest pressures when you start a company is one, finding the right co-founder, as you were saying, right? Like you probably need to find someone who's technical or someone who's an amazing designer. And the second one is like the funding, right? Like I think people like are very nervous about, hey, I'm leaving my job and I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to raise my first round, et cetera. But if we can just solve that, it'd be really cool if, because of Supra, now we have these really high caliber founders that are experts that go out and build really cool companies.
Agreed. And you've got essentially also like the baked in advisor network for a lot of those founders, because not everyone in the community wants to be a founder. A lot of people are just like really good at what they do and they're senior. And if I'm maybe one of the more junior members of the Supra community and I'm starting a fintech AI company, and you could pair me with an AI advisor and a fintech advisor, both of whom are maybe like VP level, or those people also come with networks, right? Like when I think about, they know all the right people in those spaces, they maybe know the investors in those spaces, maybe they know decision makers at enterprises that would be in my target customer base. So I think there's just like a lot of interesting opportunities for leveraging the network to its fullest potential, because PMs are inherently networked individuals. Like we're just sitting at the cross function of so many different disciplines that by the time someone is senior enough to join the community, then they've got lots of really deep Rolodexes that could be leveraged. So I know we're coming up on time, so I think this might be a good place to wrap up. I've really enjoyed this. I learned a lot about Supra that I didn't know so far, so I appreciate you going deep and sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what, in the spirit, I'm going to treat you like a guest on the pod. So Marc, if people want to learn a little bit more about you, where should they go? And then how can people be helpful to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Marc Baselga. There's not that many of us. Marc with a C. You can go www.joinsupra.com. But yeah, my goal right now is to meet as many product leaders as possible. So if you're a product leader, you want to learn more about Supra, or if I can be helpful to you in any way, just let me know. I'd love to chat.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much, Ben. That's a wrap.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Marc a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.